Hi, this is Kate from Generate Magic, and today I wanted to talk about physical healing because it's not something that's often talked about in the manifestation communities. And specifically, I wanted to focus on an insight that I had recently regarding Jesus's healings. And many people, myself included, thought it was just kind of like Jesus had this magic wand and he would go around and touch people with this wand, and then all of a sudden they would magically be cured. And um, and so I was actually, for my work, I was actually doing some research, and there was this historical scholar that was kind of approaching it more from a historical perspective, and and so he was saying that it's not so much kind of like a Harry Potter thing where it's literal magic. It's more like Jesus was unlocking the healing properties within people, just like any good practitioner does. And more so, the professor was talking about this whole concept in Galilee that existed at the time of original sin. And this was the idea that if a child was born blind or if a child was born with some sort of condition, then it was because the parents had sinned. And so there was actually a lot of shame attached to these conditions and illnesses. So not only did you have to deal with the illness, but you were also considered like a leper or a reject from society. And so Jesus basically said this is bullshit, although I'm sure he didn't use those words, but he said there's no such thing as original sin. And he removed this feeling of shame that people had around their condition. And by removing this feeling of shame and helping people to feel that no, there's nothing wrong with them, there's nothing defective, that they are whole and complete and perfect and just as worthy of love as anybody else, this is what unlocked the healing property in people. And so that to me was a very powerful revelation. And there's two things in particular that stood out to me. Well, I guess three things. One of them was the fact that it wasn't like he was exerting this power over people. It was more that that he was just unlocking this natural healing ability that people already had within them. So that's one thing. And then another thing is the whole concept of original sin. And to me, it sounds very much like it's a popular school of thought, especially in the field of psychology, that anything that's wrong with us goes back to childhood trauma. And certainly I think there can be some truth to that in some situations. And I know things that happen in childhood can have a very powerful influence, certainly. But this whole idea, for me, I think for some people, it can be very clarifying and even lead to their healing, to recognize that whatever they're going through has its source in childhood. But for other people, I think it can just be this endless loop where they're constantly reliving that trauma in various ways. And I know, a lot of people talk about going to therapy and they're just relating these stories over and over again, and they're not really experiencing any real progress. And again, I'm not knocking therapy at all, but I think a lot of people have this experience. And to me, I just see it as very disempowering, that it's not even something that you have any control over. It's just these terrible things that your parents did. Poor parents, they never get a break. But it's these terrible things that your parents did, and now you have all these issues because of it. And even more so, there's other schools of thought that we have this ancestral trauma or karma or past lives. So it might even be something that your great 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 grandmother did, and now you're screwed because of it. And so to me, that is the ultimate in disempowerment. And to me, so I think it's very liberating to say, no, screw that. You're perfect exactly as you are. And there's no there's no defect that's been passed down to you through your family or through your ancestors. And I think that's a huge weight that can really be lifted off of people. And I think karma especially can be, I believed in that for a while. Like I bought, or I wouldn't even say believed is the right word, but I bought into this whole idea that we're living out these soul contracts, and just whatever happens to us is just completely fated, right? and and now I come to realize that these things, it's not really something you can even prove or disprove. And so it more comes down to a matter of what is working for you, like what is helping you to live your best life. And to me, this whole idea of a soul contract, it's very disempowering. And also, again, I'm not like an expert in this field, but I hear like a lot of contradictions even within it. That, yeah, on the one hand, you have the soul contract that you're living out, but then a lot of these same people do talk about manifestation, and they do talk about creating your best life, which to me is like a huge contradiction. And so that's one aspect. And then the third thing that really stood out to me in these teachings about Jesus was this whole idea of shame. And I think so often there's in different healing modalities, there's an aspect of shame that's attached to an illness or to a condition. Like I've spoken to people that said when they were one woman in particular who was going into the medical profession, and she said the whole reason that she wanted to become a doctor was because when she was a child, like 7 years old, she had a doctor tell her the reason that you're experiencing these health conditions is because you're fat. And imagine being told that as a 7-year-old child. And we all know that there's so much that goes into anything, so much more than just your weight. And then second of all, just telling somebody you're fat and you need to change that isn't necessarily going to be the most effective solution. And so that's why she wanted to go into the medical industry, was because she wanted to be a different kind of doctor, a more compassionate doctor. And even within, well, I would say especially within the natural health field and people that are really into health and into nutrition, there can be a lot of shame. And again, it's not to knock the medical industry or the natural health industry. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of it. I think there's people that can adopt these principles of eating better and exercising more and totally change their life around for the better. But I think it can also become a rabbit hole, just like the whole idea of karma or childhood trauma can become a rabbit hole where you become obsessive. And, if you don't want to follow a super restrictive diet, or you're not super into fasting, and then that means that there's something wrong with you, like you lack discipline or willpower, or you're just a less virtuous person. Because I think, and I know because I've been there, that you start to attach this whole idea of eating, they call it like eating super clean or obsessively working out, to virtue. And yes, there can be aspects of it that are virtuous for sure, but we all know that the body alone does not make us more virtuous, that there's much more that goes into being a good person than simply how much you exercise or what type of diet regimen that you're following. And especially because, like many females, I've gone through issues with body image, I've gone through issues with disordered eating, and so this really kind of impacted me, like this whole feeling of shame and this whole feeling that I was a failure because I wasn't following these super restrictive diets, or I would be, and then I would have like a moment where I would fall off the wagon or I would overeat, and then I would feel these really intense feelings of hatred for myself. And I know I'm definitely not alone when it comes to this. And so, and then even within, and again, especially within the manifestation and conscious creation circles, I think there can also be a lot of shame when people really start getting behind this whole idea that you create your reality. It can be very empowering and very liberating, but then it can also be, especially, there can be some shame attached to this as well, and the fact that anytime something happens to you, like a disease, like you get a disease where you have an injury, you're like, oh, well, I created this. And it's all, again, it's all how you use it, right? So on the one hand, it can be empowering. You can say, okay, well, I created this, and so now I can create a solution. But it can also become a trap. So then every time something quote unquote bad happens to you, you're searching in your mind, like, how did I create this? And Tim Grimes, shout out to Tim Grimes, he's done some really good videos recently, and one in particular around this whole idea of shame and guilt attached to physical health and manifestation. And he basically said that yes, there's definitely many instances where what you think and what you believe can manifest itself physically in your reality, but plenty of us could disprove that as well. And to say, in every single instance, especially if it's a child that is diagnosed with cancer, or if it's a baby that's born, with a condition, are you going to say that they manifested that? So I think this line of thinking does have its faults and its limits, and it can be misused. And then there's something else that I wanted to say in regards to the suit. Oh, yes. And so when I was, well, I don't want to get too far into the story, but I've struggled, I don't want to say struggle, but I've experienced on and off recurring candida and candida symptoms for going on a decade now. And so there's a lot of shame and embarrassment attached to the condition itself, and then also to the fact that I couldn't seem to find any resolution to it. That, yeah, I would go like a few months where everything would be fine, but then something else would come up. And so then immediately my mind would jump to, what am I doing wrong? And I especially fell into this once I kind of learned about this whole school of thought that your physical symptoms are a manifestation of some. This kind of goes into the teachings of Louise Hay and other people along that line, that what you're experiencing physically is specifically related to some sort of unresolved emotion. So, for example, blindness could be, or bad eyesight could be, something that you're not seeing in your life. And I know these books have helped, and these teachings have helped a lot of people to heal. So I'm not discrediting anything in this video. That's not my intention at all. But I just want to help you if you have been following any of these modalities, but you're still not only not experiencing progress, but actually things seem to be getting worse, or your mental state seems to be getting worse. Like you're experiencing a lot of just anger and frustration that you still can't seem to resolve this. And so for me, it just kind of presented just, you would read a symptom and it would just be like this laundry list of different things that were attached to the symptom. And some of them would have nothing to do with each other. And I get it. When you work with a practitioner, the practitioner can really kind of nail down what specifically might be going on in your life. These guides aren't meant to be the end all and the be all, but it would just be these laundry list of different emotional issues. And so then any of them, if you stretch it far enough, you can think of times in your life where, sure, I've been needy, or sure, I've had some internal anger issues. And so, and so then it becomes like you're constantly looking under the rug for whatever you're hiding under the rug. And so there would be all this feeling of trying to fix all these things that were wrong with me. And on top of that, feeling this shame and this guilt that I was burying all these things or trying to run from all these things that were wrong with me. Like I was somehow, yeah, just pushing them under the rug or burying my head in the sand. And so not only was I defective, but I was also in denial. And so it just becomes like an endless trap. And so the big revelation that came to me is, what if there's nothing wrong? So what if there's nothing, I'm not talking about surface level things, but I'm talking deep down at a soul level. What if you are, and this is what Jesus was pointing at, is what if you are absolutely perfect, exactly as you are? And it's more about just removing the layers that are preventing you from seeing that. And removing all the stories that you're telling yourself and all the stories that other people have told you that you've taken on as your own. And so just removing all of those layers until you're able to see your sheer perfection, and you're able to love yourself exactly as you are. And I think in many cases, this can definitely lead to physical healing, for sure. But I think more than that, it's about just living a richer, more fulfilling life. And I think recognizing that also, in the meantime, or even if we never find a resolution to our physical issue, we can still live an amazing life. And I see evidence of this all the time. On the one hand, you definitely, I'm not saying that miracles on a physical level can't happen. You see stories about this all the time, about things that defy doctors and things that scientists have been saying for years. You always see stories of people overcoming this. But then I also see stories of people that have experienced things that most of us would say are terrible, like people that are suddenly diagnosed with cancer, people that are diagnosed with HIV, or people that just have like a horrible injury. There was a story in the in the Los Angeles news that there was a yoga teacher who was local to the area who was hit by a drunk driver. And the irony of the situation is that here he was, a yoga teacher, and his body, that was his profession. And after he was hit by this car, both of his legs had to be amputated. And so there's a lot of ways that he could have reacted to the situation. He could have been angry, he could have been resentful, which would have been 100% understandable, especially given the circumstances and given the fact that it was a drunk driver. But instead, he chose to treat the situation with love. And he even said, somebody asked him if he was angry at the driver, and he said not even for a second, because he knew he wasn't trying to demonstrate, oh, I'm such a virtuous person or anything like that. But he said if he did that, and he basically needed all the mental resources he could get, because these were the mental resources that would be devoted to his healing and to his recovery, and just to keeping a positive mental attitude in general. He needed all of that. And any anger or any resentment not only wouldn't help the situation, but could actually exacerbate the situation. And now he's acting as a source of inspiration for other people who, maybe they were born amputees, or maybe like him, they became amputees, or they became wheelchair bound because of an accident. And so he's acting as a source of inspiration, saying that, no, you can still live an incredible life. And similarly, there was a woman from my high school. She was a few years older than me, so I didn't know her super well. But she had had kind of a difficult childhood, but really overcame incredible odds to, go on to be a star athlete and to be the salutatorian. And then in her early 20s, she was diagnosed with this rare form of cancer. And that really just kind of put she had to drop out of school, and she actually died just a few years after that. But she just had such an incredible attitude about it. And when I was reading these interviews with her, I was just kind of thinking, it just really put into perspective, all these times in my life where something has happened, and it could just be like a little injury or something that happened at work, or I was rejected by somebody, and I just thought my life was over. Like, I thought it was like the end of the world. And to see this woman who was, again, diagnosed with what many on the outside world, from an outside perspective, would say, oh, this is this terrible thing. And she saw it completely differently. And she chose to be a source of inspiration for others who were maybe diagnosed with a condition. And so I think these are all just powerful reminders that yes, you can experience physical healing. That's definitely possible for you. But at the same time, we're so much more than our bodies. There's an infinite spirit that exists underneath all of this. There's this infinite God source energy that's always flowing through all things. And it's something that we can tap into anytime, no matter what's going on in the outside, whether it's with our physical health or our finances or our career or relationships. No matter what, we can always tap into this infinite source energy. So I think that's the true meaning behind Jesus's healings, and that's the message that I want to share with you today. So thank you so much for watching, and have an incredible day.